All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about Canelo Alvarez snapping out at Floyd Mayweather Jr. and retweeting something that somebody put up about Floyd Mayweather Jr. being jealous of Canelo because Canelo is surpassing Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s career at the young age of 31 years old. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. We are going to do a video today about two of the biggest egos in boxing, without a doubt, and that is Floyd Money Mayweather and Saul Canelo Alvarez. The two of them have been going back and forth, really, Floyd Mayweather Jr. this weekend and lately has been going in a little bit on Canelo Alvarez about Canelo Alvarez's picks of opponents and also the media's fascination with Canelo Alvarez and pretty much treating Canelo Alvarez as if he is surefire the best fighter in the world and giving him a lot of preferential treatment. Now, Canelo Alvarez retweets a guy that lays out this argument for why Canelo Alvarez has surpassed Floyd Mayweather Jr. in his career and associating this logic with why Floyd Mayweather Jr. is saying what Floyd Mayweather Jr. is saying. Now, before I get into the video, though, I hope that you will listen to the video all the way to the end so that when I tell you what I believe, that you can hear me clearly say what I believe. And also hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. So, Floyd Mayweather Jr. says about Canelo Alvarez the following, basically, that Canelo Alvarez is a very good fighter, but he does not believe Canelo Alvarez is the best fighter in the world. And that in order for Canelo Alvarez to really prove that he's the best fighter in the world, he needs to give these other fighters a shot against him to fight him, right? Now, if you look at who Canelo Alvarez has fought and who he's not fought, you will notice that at several of the weight classes that he has fought at, many of the best fighters in those weight classes, Canelo Alvarez has not fought. At 154 pounds, and this is Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s argument, don't get all mad at me. However, these are the facts. At 154 pounds, of the fighters that are contemporaries to Canelo Alvarez, he did not fight Jermell Charlo, he did not fight Jermall Charlo, he did not fight Demetrius Andrade. At 160 pounds, after he won a championship at 160 pounds, he did not fight Jermall Charlo, he did not fight Demetrius Andrade. As a champion at 168 pounds, he has not fought David Benavidez, and at 175 pounds, he has not fought Beterbiev or Bivol. Now, what Floyd Mayweather Jr. is saying is that Canelo Alvarez, before you say how great a fighter he is, you should be fighting the guys in his weight classes that are the best fighters in his weight class. And he says about the Makabu fight, using that as an example, that moving up to fight Makabu with cruiserweight or fighting a guy like David Benavidez for what it's worth, or Rocky Fielding and Callum Smith are not fighting the best guys. Now, all of those facts are pretty much true. That Canelo Alvarez has not fought those guys at those weight classes. And and I do agree with the fact that what Floyd Mayweather Jr. is saying is that there are a lot of other fighters in boxing right now that are as good as Canelo. And he said, don't lunch on guys like Terrence Crawford, who he believes is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter and all that. Now, what I believe about why Floyd Mayweather Jr. is saying that, and I'm going to get to Canelo Alvarez and what he has to say in a second, what I think Floyd Mayweather Jr. is pointing to in that regard is the fact that he himself was in a similar situation to these other fighters who had a guy like Oscar De La Hoya, who for a good amount of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s career was getting a lot of the limelight while Floyd was at the lower weight classes and was a better fighter. And it wound up panning out that when Oscar De La Hoya got in the ring with Floyd Mayweather Jr., Floyd Mayweather Jr. was able to prove that he was a better fighter than Oscar De La Hoya. So what he's saying is basically, look, all of the accolades that people have do not necessarily mean that you're the best fighter. Now, what Canelo Alvarez points to, if you look at this, at the spreadsheet that he retweeted, is he talks about how his career, or the guy that he retweeted, and having Canelo retweet it pretty much is telling you that this is what Canelo Alvarez thinks. Otherwise, Canelo Alvarez would have never even seen it, and he most definitely wouldn't have retweeted it. He talks about statuses like how many times Canelo has been an undisputed champion, how many championships in different weight classes, how many times somebody's an undisputed champion, how many Ring magazine titles, how many belts were won, how many champions were faced, how many former champions were faced, right? And he talked, and they say, you know, Canelo was a one-time undisputed champion. Floyd was never an undisputed champion. Canelo's been a champion in 4 weight classes, Canelo 5. Unified champions, Canelo's been there 3 times. Floyd's only been there twice. Belts won, Canelo's won 13, Floyd's won 14. Champions faced, and this is the most dubious one, 12 for Canelo, 13 for Floyd Mayweather. Former champions faced, 7 for Canelo, 9 for Floyd. Now, for me, all of that stuff is whatever, really, because the fact of the matter is, when you really look at these things, a lot of these guys were not champions when they fought them. They used to be champions or were different stages in their career. But the most important thing, really, when you're talking about whether or not Floyd Mayweather Jr. can speak to how good a fighter Canelo Alvarez is the fact that when you list the name of the champions actually, and it's funny, in this particular list that they lay out, they don't even list former champions faced. They don't list Floyd Mayweather Jr. as a former champion faced by Canelo, even though a former or current champion faced, because he is one, and he lost. So the fact of the matter is that, truly speaking, Canelo Alvarez is probably never going to pass Floyd Mayweather Jr. in accomplishments, because Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought Canelo Alvarez. And there's another problem with this list. They don't bring up the fact that Canelo Alvarez at this point of his career has had like 8 more fights than Floyd Mayweather Jr. has had in his career. I do believe that Canelo Alvarez's record is something like 57-1-1, and I do believe that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is either 50, I think he's 50-0. Floyd is 50-0. Canelo is 57-1-1, I do believe. 1 draw early in his career, 57 wins, 1 loss. Last time I checked, that is 8 fights more than Floyd Mayweather Jr. had in his career. So there is not a way, percentage-wise, for him to pass up Floyd Mayweather Jr. when he's needing more fights to do it. And then they say something about what he's done at the age of 31. Yeah, but you turned pro at 15. Floyd Mayweather Jr. was 19 when he turned pro and did not necessarily have, the most access to some of these fighters early in his career. But regardless, both guys have had absolutely terrific careers, and I do not believe that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is jealous of Canelo Alvarez's career. That doesn't make sense to me. Now, what I do believe may be happening is that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is playing that media game where he goes back and forth with Canelo, and as a result, there's press for Canelo, there's press for Floyd. Floyd has fighters under his promotional banner that he wants to get out there, and honestly, guys that he really do believe are better fighters than Canelo Alvarez. I truly believe that he seriously believes that Terrence Crawford is a better fighter than Canelo. But how are you going to argue with the guy when Floyd has actually been in the ring with Canelo and he's saying, look, man, you guys are hyping this guy and he was an easy fight for me. There was nothing complicated about him. I beat him easily. And yeah, I'm watching him fight. He's the same guy. He hasn't gotten any better. And so since Floyd has a record of Canelo has a record of 57-1-1, and that 1 at the end belongs to Floyd Mayweather Jr., and Floyd Mayweather Jr. has a record of 50-0, and 1 of those 50 are Canelo Alvarez. Floyd can pretty much say what he wants to say. But as far as like whether they've actually passed each other up in accomplishments, to me, it's a silly conversation because you can just add a bunch of accomplishments. Like you can add accomplishments like, well, I've won my undisputed championship in 12 months and you never won one. Do you really believe that if Floyd Mayweather Jr. wanted to be an undisputed champion, Floyd Mayweather Jr. couldn't have got his hands on 4 belts? Floyd Mayweather Jr. did not find that was not an accomplishment that Floyd Mayweather Jr. wanted to accomplish. So why would he be jealous about somebody doing something that he knows full well he could have done? The question is, for me, is who's the better fighter in their career? And I honestly don't think there's much doubt that it's Floyd. Canelo Alvarez, on the other hand, definitely has the right to do whatever he wants to do in his career. He's big enough a name to pick and choose who he wants to fight. Sometimes he picks guys that are good. Sometimes he picks guys that are not. But, it's just going to be what it is. Canelo fans are going to support him for what he does. Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s fans are going to support him. And forever and ever and on we'll go. But anyway, that's my take on the situation. Make sure you leave your comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think. And I would greatly appreciate that. And with that, I'm out. Peace.